I mean, I'm thinking, what? Yeah, what? No, I want to go there. So I've been there, done that. I did not buy the t-shirt. I did not buy the t-shirt.
You didn't.
He wasn't selling them then.
So, but I'm gonna tell you this is advice, this experience. If that happens, if you shut it down, you may miss something
Yes.
that could change your life.
Yes.
So I got an approach that we'll try. I want you to try a new kind of listening experience tonight. And that is, try to listen without having to decide if you agree or disagree with what you're hearing. Just open the space and let the information flow in and let it sit. And like Kathy says, let it marinate and just let it be and see what happens. So luckily, in my experience, Ginger kept, okay, Nick, it's okay, it's okay. But I've been there and done that, so I understand it. And a lot of people have gone through that. So the rest of you, I just want to share some experience in my sharing. And the key thing is what I just said. Try listening without having to decide if you agree or disagree. Now, I may make you mad, like Lynn said. I may make you mad, but this is. It is what it is. So I hope it don't make you mad. That's not my intention. So I found something about myself recently when I went to share. I've been in relationship with a lot of people that you would describe as fundamentalists. And I find myself becoming enraged. Enraged at their refusal to hear. Enraged at their ignorance. Now, isn't that so bad that I said that? I mean, I'm a good judger. I judge good. Unfortunately, I'm working on that. Because, at least now when I do it, almost every time I recognize it. Okay? So in my sharing of what I'm learning and experiencing in my studies, and in my sharing what I'm learning from the speakers here, I found I'm losing more ground than I'm gaining. I mean, isn't simply saying that a good indicator of what my problem is? So win-lose competition with me. I'm going to win this argument. So that was what I'm doing. So I'm searching for ways to share what I'm learning that will not cause the rifts that will permanently shut doors. I'm trying to find ways to effectively communicate and have effective, productive conversations. So what have I learned? So, one thing I just learned. I found I'm coming across to people as I'm right, they are wrong. And that immediately shuts down any meaningful discussion. And it firmly entrenches both sides. And it makes me so angry. I get so angry. So, why did I get so angry? So, in my counseling sessions, my spiritual development counseling with Robert, so he one day said, I'm going to tell you about your shadow self. And he says, nobody can make you angry. Nobody can make you angry. Oh, come on, Robert, they make you angry all the time. He says, perhaps what's happening is you are seeing characteristics or aspects of yourself that is making you angry. So aspects you may not recognize consciously or you don't want to acknowledge. So Robert gave me this mantra, and I want y'all to kind of use it tonight. Whenever I make you angry, just do this mantra. I am that too. Okay? I am that too. So in my interactions, damn, I'm a fundamentalist too. I'm a fundamentalist too. So if you've convinced yourself that you know all the right answers, you might be a fundamentalist. If you're from Alabama, especially Tuscaloosa, You might be a redneck. You might be. So instead of a Christian fundamentalist, what am I? An enlightened fundamentalist?
That's not moron.
That's it. Oh man, that hurts. So fundamentalists live the answers. Now that's a weird kind of sounding thing, and I'm going to kind of explain that. Fundamentalists live the answers. Why do we feel we have to have absolutes anyway? Why do we have to have all the answers? Why do we tend to live the answers? So, talking with Ginger about this a lot, she says, Nick, I've journaled about this exact same thing. And so she shared me her journal, or diary, and she said, here, you can read right here. Okay? Of course, and then I said, Ginger, this is so good, can I share this tonight? And she said, yes. So while I had it, copying it there, of course, one of those pages accidentally turned over. And that's when I learned I'm a mighty, mighty man. She put that in her notes. I did not read her diary. So let me read some of these things, and I'm going to go down some little rabbit trails, but I'll come back to it. Earlier in my spiritual journey, I needed absolutes to feel safe in this uncertain world. I clung to needing to know and being right absolutes. I became an extremist, willing to go to war with you to prove my way was the right way. Living with these beliefs created separation of humanity in my life. So I'm going to stop right there. So created separation. Separation is what we've got to overcome, right? We're going to talk a lot about separation. So let me start a little equation here, because I do all the science stuff here, a little math. So separation, I think that's what we have to overcome. Separation, if I think I'm separate from Sharon, then, and she thinks she's separate from me, and I think I'm an individual, then what is that called? Separation is ego, right? So I have an ego. Okay? What do they call separation from God, or missing the mark? Sin. So that's an interesting equation there, and we'll see if it makes sense when I go through it. But I'll come back. So Jesus said we got to overcome sin, right? Because what did he say? Repent and sin no more. Now religion says that means change your behavior and don't go do bad things. But over time, kind of religion's kind of corrupted a lot of the words. And repent really doesn't mean that. And repent, if you go concentrate on the use of the word in the Bible, it means think with a new mind. Think with a new mind. So to me, Jesus is saying, think with a new mind and quit thinking yourself. So repent and sin no more. That's what it means to me. So I'll get back to gender stuff now. Living with this belief created separation from humanity in my life. I became hard-hearted, disengaged, anxious, shameful, and depressed. Judging others and myself was my way of life. Comparing and competing was a normal way of life. I chose the tree of good and evil, which separated me from God, and I died spiritually. He told us if we ate from that tree, we'd surely die. Now I understand that in order for me to be right, I must declare others as wrong. Living in absolute beliefs with no doubts leads me to turning my faith into an obey or die lifestyle. I understand that love, belonging to something greater than myself, and vulnerability is living in faith. Now these next sentences get it. God is everything and in everything. He is both my understanding and yours. He's in your understanding. He's in my understanding. Right? He loves us just as we are and where we are in the present moment. So what that's brought to my mind, that particular God is everything, in everything, He's both my understanding and yours. As soon as you conceive of the other's person's understanding, then you are separating yourself from God. Since God is in everything, God is also in that others' understanding. So, judging makes us slaves to our ego. Is that what Genesis 2:17 says? Judging makes us a slave. I'll tell you how to do that. I'm going to emulate Lynn here. I'm going to project some Lynn here. So I'm paraphrasing the verse is, if you partake of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you will die. You will surely die. So, surely die, will die, die is mot to move. Okay? Going into dramaturgy. So that was die, and that's kind of dying. So it's like a process of dying is what most scholars would tell you those words mean. So it doesn't mean right then you'll die. It means you're in the process of dying then. Okay? That's why it's got the two words there. Is what most scholars say. To me, though, the dramatria is that's a 40, and 40 is water, and water is ego. And Talmud is 400. I hope this is right. If it ain't, don't tell me. This is slavery or addiction. So to me that verse is, if you judge, you will become a slave or you will become addicted to your ego. I think that's what judging is. As long as we keep judging, we're living in our ego. So I did that right before I spoke to my notes. Fundamentalism says we know the answers, therefore we're going to impose them on anybody that doesn't agree with us. When we speak in absolutes, perhaps we become fundamentalists. And when fundamentalism rules the day, new information becomes a threat. And those who believe they alone possess the once and for all truth are likely to not only oppose differences of opinion, but may also miss some truth. So Wilson Bryan Key, he's not a real famous writer. He wrote a lot of, I'll let Robert tell you about this guy.
No,
But he
you
said,
You say it.
Okay. Well, he said this. Most intellectual progress and comprehension of complex phenomena cease once the mind deludes itself into believing it has uncovered a holy grail or eternal truth. Any meaningful analysis of reality must consider all such so-called truths as merely tentative expediencies. What that quote, end quote. What that means to me is truth goes on and on, deeper and deeper. Truth is a proverbial onion. You just keep peeling it back. So let me write this down now. A wise man said this. I'm not quoting Lynn, but a wise man said this. This is a wild one. I got to write this down. Y'all ain't going to believe it. Oh my God, I write that right? If you believe in God, you will never know God. Maybe that wasn't a wise man, maybe it was a wise guy. I don't know. But Lynn can explain that to you when Lynn talks about putting God in the box. So, not the stealing, I mean, I've heard it, it's not patented anymore, is it? Copyright ran out on that? Okay. So, what that means to me is if you put your I believe navy blue God in this box. Okay, I believe navy blue God. What if there's some truth out there that comes along, and the truth is God is powder blue? You're going to say, nope, God is navy blue, and you're going to deflect that off. It's not going to come in your box. You just miss God. Okay? Now, what I'm suggesting right now, though, is if you replace that word with I know, navy blue God, it can be the same result. It can be exactly the same result. Because you can, if you know, you think you know, you could miss something. So, I never thought about that until I started putting this together. So, absolute certainty keeps us separated. from our neighbors, and even God. So we can go back up to our equation now. Absolute certainty keeps us separated from our neighbors, because if I'm absolutely certain, you ain't, so I'm different than you, I'm separate from you. And then you just carry that equation all the way through. Absolute certainty is separation, is ego, is sin. So absolute certainty keeps us separated from our neighbors and God by thinking that what we know is the whole final truth. There's no room for others' experience. Besides making us insufferable, it prevents us from examining ourselves critically and learning from others. So I think it's so important to keep the conversation flowing. Keep the conversation flowing. So can you tell the difference, can you see the difference in some word choices here? I'm hurrying, Robert.
No, you're fine.
All right.
I'm glad I taught you that one.
What if it is ... It is ... So an example is, what if it is an allegory versus it is an allegory? So the first one, put that way, can actually lead to consideration and discussion. The second one, it is an allegory, can totally kill the conversation with hard feelings, and probably for both people. Been there. Done that. So I want to read you a poem real quick, because I'm saying we need to live the questions instead of living the answers. And this poem, I think, explains it real well, so please abide me and listen to this. It's called Stripped by God. What would happen if I pursued God? If I filled my pockets with openness, grabbed a thermos half full of fortitude, and crawled into the cave of the Almighty, nose first, eyes peeled, heart hesitantly following, until I was face to face with raw, pulsing beat of mystery. What if I entered and it looked different than anyone ever described? What if the cave was too large to be fully known, far too extensive to be comprehended by one person or group, too vast for one dogma or doctrine? Would I shatter at such a thought, perish from paradox or puzzle, shrink and shrivel before the power? Would God be diminished if I lived a question rather than a statement? Would I lose my faith as I discovered the magnitude of grace? Oh, for the willingness to explore, to leave my tiny vocabulary at the entrance and stand before you naked, stripped of pretenses and rigidity, disrobed of self-righteousness and tidy packages, stripped of all that holds me at a distance from you and your world. Strip me, O God, then clothe me in curiosity and courage. So value the questions is what I'm saying. That's where the real wisdom is. So I can't have a presentation go by where I don't quote Einstein. And sometimes Einstein really said it, you know. Sometimes not. This time, I think he said this. Don't listen to the person who has the answers. Listen to the person who has the questions. Harold Beck says, the beginning of true wisdom is asking the questions for which there are no answers. You know, that brings to mind, I think, this is a quote from Lynn, theology is what some people made up because they weren't willing to say, I don't know.
That's good.
Amen.
Our own Ginger Boat, this is a quote from her. Of course, it's a lot longer than our other quotes. Wisdom is the understanding that we do not know what is going to happen next. We become comfortable surrendering to the need to know why. We relax and let go of the prison of absolutes. We soften, become open and flexible, moving within the present moment. We accept our power with humility and grace. We accept what is, make the best of it, and flow with the energy as we continue our return journey back to our Creator. Thank you, Judy, for that. So, you know what? Let me do this. talking about truth anyway. That's kind of what we're talking about. Truth is all perception anyway, right? So, see if you can see this shadow on the board real quick. Okay, so Jan Phillips says that this object is a circle. Can you all see it? She says this object is a circle. Mark Eden says, no, it's not. This object is a rectangle. It's not a circle. Okay, well, that is true, that that's a circle. And that is true, that that's a rectangle. But it's not true that a circle is a rectangle. So, is this true? Not so fast. If you've been to my other lectures, you know that this is simply an illusion. Matter is nothing but energy. And Einstein, again, said what we call matter is energy whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. So truth goes on and on and on and on. So I thought that was a good, simple demonstration of the truth. So you can either live the answers and probably be wrong and disappointed many times, or you can live the questions. Ambiguity is not the enemy. I think the ambiguity is a vital part of the journey. So before I turn it over to Robert, is there any kind of sharing and reflection from anything? Yes.
What I saw, when you got, I know God is the navy blue.
Mhm.
If you lose your box, if you erase that box and erase the navy blue, then you can really say, I know God.
Yes. Yes.
But he will always be outside the next box that you think is the last box.
That's
you got out of.
exactly right.
All we do is go from a little bigger box,
Little bigger box.
and he's always outside that.
Well, thank you so much for letting me share. And I'm going to turn this over to Robert now, if I can find the glasses. So Robert is here, lives here in Scottsboro, and he's retired Air Force. And now he is a social psychologist, and he is an interfaith, interspiritual minister. He works with the Huntsville Interfaith Mission Service, and he teaches spiritual practices and provides spiritual direction and counseling. And he also, weekly, Saturday mornings at Wellness Ways Facility, he conducts the experiential, I call it experiential worship services at Wellspring. And people that are local, I highly recommend you come and try this out. And if you don't like it, it's a money back guarantee. But there is no charge for this. So everybody please
I
welcome.
thought he knew something I did.
So let's welcome Robert.
That was just great, Nick. I really am glad to know that you're actually listening when I try to exchange wisdom. Nick has great insights, and at Wellspring, we enter into dialogue because we're always learning from each other. There's nobody there that has any of the answers. And we're just trying to listen to questions and see how we might grow. Thank you, Nick. Nick and Ginger asked that I did take a few minutes. I'm actually going to kind of overlay a lot of what Nick said, some in more detail and some in less. They wanted me to talk a little bit about listening so that your experience this weekend can be enhanced a little bit. Much of our human and spiritual development involves letting go. Letting go of opinions and ways of thinking, our personal baggage, expectations, judgments, boredom, our self-assertiveness, and even our defensiveness. It seems that as we get older, we find out that learning seems to be more about unlearning. And it isn't until we can truly let go that we can love unconditionally and really listen deeply. And Nick, I may need to get you to help write on the board, or Ginger, if you will. I don't know if my shoulder is going to let me write without shaking all over the place. So the invitation for this weekend, and if you'd like to write this down so that you can have it with you, is to let go, is to listen, and to love. So 3 L words. Let go, listen, and love. Love. But learn's a good one too. I only have 3 on my paper, but I got 4. And also, the invitation is to remember this quote by Thomas Aquinas: "Whatever is received according to the manner of the receiver." So remember, what you're taking in isn't what they're giving out, or what I'm giving out. You know, I always feel a little unease up here because it's like I have no control. You know? I want you to have what I got to say, not what you want to hear. It just doesn't happen that way. So let me share a little bit about listening and give you some hints on what you might be able to do to better listen this weekend. And here's some information from Kay Lindell, who's the founder of the Listening Center. Perhaps one of the most precious and powerful gifts we give another person is to really listen to them. To listen with quiet, fascinated attention, with our whole being and fully present. This sounds simple, but if we're honest with ourselves, we don't often listen to each other so completely. But listening is a creative force. Something quite wonderful occurs when we are fully listened to. We expand, ideas come to life and grow, we remember who we are. Some speak of this force as a creative fountain, or a wellspring, as I like to call it, within us that springs forth. Others call it an inner spirit, or an intelligence, and some refer to it as the true self. Whatever this force is, it shrivels up when we are not listened to, and thrives when we are. Listening well takes time, skill, and a readiness to slow down, to let go of expectations, judgment, boredom, self-assertiveness, defensiveness. I've noticed once people experience the depth of being listened to like this, they also begin to listen to others in the same way. Listening is an art that calls for practice. Imagine if we all just spent a few minutes each day practicing the art of listening and being fully present with the person we are with. There would be a collective sigh of contentment and joy. So listen. And Kay provides several tips on how to listen better. And Nick covered many of these, so I'll try to skim over these a little faster than what I intended. The first one is to suspend assumptions. When we assume, what we assume is often invisible to us. We assume that others have had the same experiences that we have, and that's how we listen to them. We learn to recognize assumptions by noticing when we get surprised or upset or annoyed by something someone else is saying. Surprised, upset, or annoyed. You may be making an assumption. Let it be suspended and resume listening for understanding of the other. The other one is to listen without judgment. If you're sitting there and thinking, that's good, that's bad, I like that, I don't like that, you're having a conversation with your own mind, not listening to the speaker. Simply notice when you do this and return back to listening. Next is suspend status. Right. There's no hierarchy here. We're just the same people. We sit in the seat the same way. We want to honor confidentiality. If something shares something, we're not going to share names. Of course, in bigger organizations, you don't want that happening because it just fosters gossip. Listen for understanding, not to agree with or believe. You don't have to agree with or believe anything that is said. Your job is to listen and understand new ideas and ways to think about something. As a listener, you also have the job is to ask clarifying or open-ended questions so that you can assist with your own understanding and explore your own assumptions. And watch out for questions with your agenda embedded in them. Like, don't you think that? Listen, don't be afraid of silence. Somebody wants to pause for a bit, formulate some words, hold some love, cherish what was said, reflect on it, let silence be. And of course, the one that we all learned from first grade is one person speaks at a time. So the invitation is to let go. Nick, would you help hand out some index cards, and if everybody has something, everybody just take a couple of index cards. And just take a minute and think about some things about yourself that you would like to let go of, whether it helps with listening or love. So that you can let go of those things. And if you just want to write those down, if it's one thing, or if you fill out 2 cards, or just a couple of things, you know.
You probably
If you need a spiral notepad.
I got a little stack.
You can see I got a thundering binder with a lot of eyes. So. But just take a minute and write down some things that you would like to just let go of. Whether it is that personal baggage or your opinion about something, or an expectation that you have, or a judgment. Maybe you're holding something against someone, or you have some heartache that you want to let go of. And then, here in a minute, we're going to pass a basket around and you can all put those in. So if you'd like to symbolically just wad those things up, or tear that card up, and throw it in the basket as we go through. You don't have to put your name on it. Just anything you'd like to let go of. We'll move the basket around a couple of times. So it's pass it. So feel free just to fold your card up, tear it up. However you want to let go of it, just let it go. Whatever's in the basket, I'm going to keep in my safekeeping. I'll take home and burn. I like to have my little rituals too of honoring everybody's attendance here, and letting go of things isn't always easy.
If you couldn't spell it, could it still work?
Absolutely.
Works better that way.
Let go of a couple of letters.
Draw a picture.
So as I was saying a minute ago, Nick covered several of the things that I'm going to go through. Being a psychologist and a minister, and of course my psychological work and research has been focused on spiritual intelligence and how we develop spiritually. So I kind of put those things together in a presentation tonight to talk about transformation. How do we transform? How does ego form? How do we work through our lives to get rid of ego or to grow towards a higher consciousness? So those are kind of my topics tonight. I'm going to go through transformation, modes of consciousness or ways of thinking, ego formation, the states of consciousness that we have, the lines of development or areas of development, and stages of development. I'm going to do this a couple of different ways. So I'm going to get into one area, and then when I get into the next, you're going to hear me saying some of the same things I said in the other area. So this good overlap will give you a couple of different perspectives on the topics that I'm going to cover. I used to have a economics professor in undergraduate school, and he was deaf. He wore hearing aids. He talked really loud, but he never could hear your questions. But almost every presentation he had, he would say, "This is so cool, you're going to love it." And then he turned his back and go, "But I'm not going to say that." In leadership school in the Air Force, I had a leadership instructor. I can't remember her name. She was a technical sergeant. High energy. I'm not high energy. You'll probably figure that out pretty quick. This is it. I mean, this is where I'm at all the time. This is it. All the time. Not many lows, not much high. But anyway, I'll try to do my best to imitate her. But she was the same way. She was really excited about what she was going to say. She would say, "So today what we have planned for you is mind-boggling, spine-tingling, and orgasmic." But I'm not going to say that either. I never know how she got away with that in the Air Force, but I guess because that was the only thing she said, that was okay. So transformation, let's talk about transformation just a little bit. And I want to start by sharing something that a researcher named Ken Wilber has written. He's written hundreds of books. You know Ken Wilber? Okay, good. All right, because that's my psychology background and integral theory. All right. And he talks about transformation versus translation. Well, this is out of his book called One Taste. He says, in a series of books, I've tried to show that religion itself has always performed two very important but very different functions. One, it acts as a way of creating meaning for separate self. It offers myths and stories and tales and narratives and rituals and revivals that, taken together, help the separate self make sense of and endure the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. This function of religion does not usually or necessarily change the level of consciousness. It does not deliver radical transformation, nor does it deliver a shattering liberation from the separate self altogether. Rather, it consoles the self, it fortifies the self, defends the self, promotes the self. As long as the separate self believes the myths, performs the rituals, mouths the prayers, or embraces the dogma, then the self is fervently believed will be saved. Either now in the glory of being God, saved, or God's favor, or in an afterlife that ensures eternal wonderment. But two, religion has also served, in a usually very, very small minority, the function of radical transformation and liberation. This function of religion does not fortify the separate self, but utterly shatters it. Not consolation, but devastation. Not entrenchment, but emptiness. Not complacency, but explosion. Not comfort, but revolution. In short, not a conventional bolstering of consciousness, but a radical transmutation and transformation at the deepest seat of consciousness self. There are several different ways that we can state these two important functions of religion. The first function, that of creating meaning for the self, is a type of horizontal movement. The second function, that of transcending the self, is a type of vertical movement, higher or deeper, depending on your metaphor. The first I have named translation, the second transformation. And that is like my primary lens when I approach anything religious or spiritual, is how can it help transformation? And not that I don't get into it, but my primary lens isn't how do I interpret Scripture, or how do I understand Greek words or Hebrew words. Not that that's not important, it's just not the primary lens. How does that give me information that helps me transform? So transformation. So when we talk about transformation, it's like, okay, so what are we transforming from and to? And how does that happen? So here's some froms. Fear, pride, arrogance, violence, ambition, greed, power, lust, gluttony, rigid, addiction, hate, racism, deceit, anger, depression, loneliness, meaninglessness. It's a lot. What are we transforming to? What is in our higher consciousness? Happiness, love, authenticity, peace, compassion, kindness, charity, creativity, freedom, gentleness, openness, generosity, community, justice, union. And the list is much bigger than what I gave you. You can just go through that side, right? What are these things that we're not comfortable, that we have about ourselves, that we don't like about ourselves, or other people don't like about ourselves? What is it we want more of? What are those positive aspects? That's what transformation is about. Let me know when it gets to like 8:30.
Okay.
Because I may have to speed up a little bit or tune over. So if we're trying to get to unity of consciousness, right, we want total union, which we won't get, but that's kind of our goal. That's what we're aimed at. We have basically 4 paths. Okay? Not that there's only 4, but there's like 4 basic ones. One is of devotion. Okay? These paths are also called yogas. That's what yoga means, is union. So devotion, or bhakti yoga, B-H-A-K-T-I. We have intellect or knowledge is a path, right? Which is jnana yoga, J-A-N-A. We have work and service as a path. Okay? Karma, K-A-R-M-A. Karma means work, service. And Raja Yoga, R-A-J-A, is meditation. And the reason, so many of us will go on a path of jnana yoga, intellect, knowledge. We'll read scriptures, we'll read books, we're looking to learn more intellectually, right? And this can be a very difficult path. It's called the razor's edge because it's using the intellect to go beyond the intellect, right? As Nick was saying, you're going at multiple levels of things that you can't understand. So to try to use intellect to go beyond that, they call it the razor's edge. Devotion is just falling in love with that mystery that we call God. By sharing love, by singing about love, by dancing love, being with people, those kinds of things. And of course, work and service, we see that a lot in a lot of our church communities. just providing charity and those kinds of things. But the reason that I bring these up is we have to be cautious about this because somebody might just take the intellectual path, and when we interact with them, they may be on the devotion path, and we're trying to share information with them, and they're not going to get it. That's not the path that they're on. Okay? So we have to acknowledge that. Well, why don't you understand? You know, we get into those our self-frustrations about why don't you understand? I'm sharing information with you. No, I want you to come and I want you to chant with me and sing with me and come back. What are you talking about? What is that going to do? But all these paths are valid paths towards you. Okay? Now, some people are eclectics, and they're going to go, and they like all 4 paths or 2 or 3 paths. I have to be real careful because I noticed when Nick was talking, he would say things that I'm like, oh, I want to add to that, oh, I want to add to that. And of course, when you're a professor teaching college, you can kind of go whatever direction you want. I'm doing my best to like hang on to my notes, stay with my notes, be mindful and respectful of time. So, okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about is modes of cognition, the ways in which we think. Okay, and I'm going to mention 4. Dualistic thinking, non-dualistic thinking, judgment, and discernment. I think that those are important kind of for how we approach this conference.
Would you repeat those 4?
Sure, dualistic, non-dualistic, judgment, discernment. How many of you are familiar with Cynthia Bourgeot? She's a wonderful Episcopal priest, spiritual teacher, written several wonderful books. But she has said that we really need a moratorium on this word non-dual. It kind of gets thrown out there to apply to whatever people want it to apply to, whether it's some mushroom trip that they're on or some other meaning that they want to apply to. But I want to try to get back to the original definition of non-dual that came out of our mystical traditions. But let's look at dualistic thinking. Psychologists and neuroscientists have provided evidence or found evidence for years that our brain is wired for kind of binary thinking. It's ones and zeros, it's either ors. And that's what dualistic thinking is. It's seeing things as right, wrong, good, bad, black, white, left, right, light, dark. It's either or thinking, it's all or nothing thinking. It's in search of answers, it's not in search of wisdom. It is what we call reason, logic, a rational mind. It's our seeking for certitude. I talked about that, right? And if we spend most of our time in a dualistic mode, then we're out there looking, to be sure of ourselves. And we can become arrogant pretty quick and not even recognize it. And this type of thinking is attached to judgment. Okay, we'll talk about judgment in a minute. Non-dualistic thinking is to adopt a mind that says both and are possible. Instead of either or, left or right, it's both and. How would you know left if you didn't know right? Right? How would you know black if you didn't know white? Right? To know one, you have to know the other. This non-dualistic thinking is to be able to look at things with a calm detachment. Okay? To see them, not judge them, just recognize that they're there. It's an ability to experience yourself more as process and context than it is content. We call this the contemplative mind, especially in the contemplative tradition of Christianity. It's very Buddhist thinking, it's very esoteric, mystical thinking from almost all of the traditions, actually. The non-dual mind is the only thing that can hold paradox and mystery. Only thing that can hold paradox and mystery. So if you ever feel like you're not comfortable with paradox and mystery, or not knowing, you're not engaging the non-dualistic mode of your mind. So it's being able to see paradoxes like human and divine, right, exist at the same time, at the same space. That material and spirit can exist in the same moment, in the same instant. But it doesn't eliminate the negative. Okay? I want to be real clear about this. Non-dualistic thinking is not the elimination of dualistic thinking. We as human beings must have both. You know, you couldn't find your way to the hotel today if you didn't have dualistic thinking. Somebody gave you a map, you know, you had to see what color the street lights were and so forth. You need dualistic thinking. And non-dual thinking is where we engage in discernment. So let me speak a little bit about judgment. In almost every religious scripture, you're going to find some verse similar to Matthew 7:1 that says, "Do not judge." Right? Do not judge. And what I believe that this really means is do not label.
Yes.
Okay? Do not label. All right? As soon as you label something, you've created boundaries. Right? You've defined otherness. Right? You've created separateness. So do not label is a good way to put it. Some of those people think about, well, you know, I need good judgment during the day. That's really not what that verse is about. It's about do not label. So discernment. Discernment is a means for identifying when the Spirit is at work in a situation, seeing the value of both hands. Okay? Are you able to be at peace with whatever God shows you in this discernment, regardless of the outcome? The process of discerning Spirit's will for one's life and one's action. Discernment is rooted in the understanding that God is ever at work in our lives, inviting, directing, guiding, and drawing us into the fullness of life. Discernment is having an ability to say, I don't understand what that is. And I can accept that I don't even have to understand. And that my life will go on. Discernment seeks to discover God's presence in these moments and to follow the direction and guidance He gives us through His grace. It's not the events themselves that are of interest, but rather the effective responses they invoke in us. Our feelings of joy, sorrow, peace, anxiety, and all the indefinable somethings that arise and stir within us. Discernment presupposes an ability to reflect on the ordinary events of one's life, self-knowledge, knowledge of one's deepest desires, and openness to God's direction and guidance. See if I can give you an example of a concept of wholeness. We can bring everything together. That what is what is. Parker Palmer writes this about wholeness. How many of you are familiar with Parker Palmer? Okay. Great teacher, Quaker, wonderful spiritual director, written several books about education as well as about spirituality. And I believe this comes from his book, Hidden Wholeness. He says, wholeness does not mean perfection. It means embracing brokenness. Embracing feeling fragmented. Okay? as an integral part of life. Wholeness need not be a utopian dream. We can use devastation and mistakes as a seedbed for new life.
Seedbed for what?
For new life. So when you go back and you look at these things that you're transforming from, your fear, pride, arrogance, anger, depression, loneliness, meaningless, whatever's on your list, those are part of your wholeness. Those are seedbeds. There's lessons there. So it isn't by taking away the brokenness or the fragments, the bad. It is by experiencing those fragments and finding God's strength inside of the fragmentation and the brokenness.
Would you say that again?
Sure. It isn't by taking away the bad. Remember we talked about good, bad? Right? It isn't about taking away the bad, the fragments or the broken, or the feelings of brokenness. It's by experiencing those fragments and by finding God's strength inside of the fragmentation. God exists in the dark and the light.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And as a psychologist, especially a social psychologist, and looking at our large groups, whether it's churches, businesses, communities, or the United States, I really feel, it's one of those tangents I said I wasn't going to go off. I really think that this is a growing problem for society. Even in the field of psychology, we are stressing coping mechanisms, how to set this brokenness and fragmentation to the side, or put it under the rug, or set it on the nightstand. And we're not helping people understand that there's a real message and power there that helps them grow, that helps them transform.
Yes. Yes.
So now I want to take a moment, that is the modes of cognition, okay? Just kind of a brief description so you can understand a little bit about the difference between dualistic and non-dualistic. Dualistic always involves judgment. Non-dualistic is discernment. It's taking in the good and the bad. It's, and I'm going to say this probably more than a dozen times tonight and over the weekend, it's yes, yes, and more. Right? It's not good, bad, and that's it. It's yes, yes, and there's more.
Yeah, good.
So now I'm going to take 10 minutes, I hope, and I just want to describe how ego is formed. Okay? And you're all probably familiar with this. I'm just going to try to kind of cover it to bring it into the room. How is ego formed? And of course, you'll see the psychology and all of this. But it's helpful in understanding the nature of human consciousness. I think I might need some help in just a second writing on the board. There's a model that begins with the assumption that reality, what is truly real, our unity consciousness, the all, and that exists with no boundaries, no separation. What is truly real is unity consciousness, or the all, and exists with no boundaries. So let's see if we can just write that down. Unity consciousness, you can write UC if you want. The all. Give me a favor and write it underneath, because I'm going to do something on it. Sorry. And then underneath that, write reality. And then maybe right here, write in big letters, God. Thank you. So this model begins with the assumption that reality, what is truly real, is unity consciousness, the all. And it exists with no boundaries, right? No box. No separation. This is the truth held by all of the major esoteric, spiritual, and religious traditions. But the nature of our experience is that we progressively bind and limit consciousness through the establishment of boundaries. Okay. The fundamental question asked by humans is, who am I? And as soon as you answer that question, you have limitation. You've drawn a boundary, right? As soon as you've answered that question, you've drawn a boundary. It's like drawing a circle, and it's what's inside the circle that is self. It's what else, and what is outside the circle is not self. And I'll specify little s self. Okay? In this way, a fundamental polarization and duality is created. Because the nature of language and symbol itself is to define, label, and limit, right? Every time we use a word, it's different than another word, so it's separate. And as soon as you name or define, identify or label anything, you move into the realm of dualistic thinking and separation. Boundary lines are also potential battle lines. For whatever exists outside of us is potentially a threat to our well-being, potentially in conflict or in competition with us, right? And as you grow, what is included as self becomes narrower and more exclusive. I.e., it excludes more.
Yes.
Okay? One way of understanding this process is to look at it from the perspective of child development. Anyone who's been present at the birth of a baby has certainly had a chance to glimpse the energy of undifferentiated unity or oneness. How many of you have seen it? Okay. Some of you have done it. As the infant develops, there begins to be a binding of consciousness into what is known as symbiosis, or the symbiotic mother-infant configuration or bond. Okay. In the symbiotic configuration, the mother-infant unit begins to separate out from the rest of the environment. Okay. However, in symbiosis, there's no difference from the infant's perspective between the mother and the child. There are simply one unit. Needs arise and are met with no gap, no boundary between infant and mother. Mothers have experienced this and they can tell you that. Men, hey, that's yours. So we can describe this as a pre-personal state, since no personal self-sense has yet come into being. Okay? Try. The child gradually begins to differentiate between what is inside his body and what's outside his body, and needs arise and are not met immediately. So a gap exists, and this leads to the beginning of the differentiation of organism and environment. Okay? The self at this point is in the total psychophysical organism, and the environment is not self, becomes something to be acted upon and controlled in order to get what you need. The baby's job is to let the environment know that it needs something, for instance, by crying. While at this stage the self becomes differentiated from the environment, there is no differentiation yet within the baby between mental and physical processes. Just between baby and the environment, but not inside between mental and physical. The baby doesn't think, I'm hungry, so I'm going to cry. Rather, crying is an immediate response, a spontaneous expression, a communication of the total organism. All right? As the child continues to develop and its mental, cognitive processes become more complex and differentiated, a second level of self, not self, differentiation begins. And this is between the mental and physical within the organism. Socialization proceeds with the physical bodily processes becoming something to be acted upon and controlled. Okay? As the child's ability to hold mental pictures or images of things as well as his ability to control and keep his bodily functions in check. Toilet training, holding back tears, those kinds of things. This is where core ego formation begins. Self is not identified as our mental concept or image of ourselves separate from the body. Self is now Self is now identified as our mental concept or image of ourselves separate from the body. Right? Because we're going to control the body, so we have to be separate. The body becomes something you have rather than something you are as part of your totality. The boundary line at this stage generally gets drawn between voluntary and involuntary processes. Voluntary bodily processes are those you can control, and involuntary are ones you can't. They're the strange, the mysterious, that something is happening to you. For example, I can say I move my arm, but I can't say I beat my heart or I circulate my blood. The ego, the word ego refers to a more or less accurate mental image or concept of self. That is one that includes the full spectrum of thoughts and feelings that exist within us, which is differentiated from the body, which is then considered to be not self. This constitutes the development of the ego level of this spectrum that we're talking about. The next binding of consciousness occurs as we learn through socialization and interaction with the world that even with the ego self, certain traits, thoughts, feelings, desires, and wishes are acceptable while others aren't. How many of you went through that? I mean, if you went through adolescence, you had it, right? Parents told you what you could and couldn't do. Your peers told you what they didn't think you were capable of. Love, playing piano, whatever it was, right? Those that are acceptable are included in the concept of self known as persona, right? From the Greek word for mask. And those that are not acceptable are pushed out of consciousness through the defenses of denial and projection or repression. That is, that they are turned into the not self. This is known as the shadow. Nick talked a little bit about shadow before. So things we accept are persona, there are masks. Things that are not accepted is shadow. Something we've repressed, denied, or projected. So two major psychological dynamics are involved in persona and shadow formation. The first is repression, which is pushing away what is unacceptable into the unconscious. Right? So somewhere in our brain, we're not tapping into it anymore. The second dynamic goes a step beyond repression, and that's projection. This is the taking of the contents of your psychological makeup and saying, in effect, they are not yours, but rather they're out there in somebody else. Nick talked about that a little bit too. And what is left, the persona, is therefore an inaccurate and distorted self-image, because it leaves out half the picture of who you are. It's important to remember that boundaries divide things into opposites, dualistic, right? Not in reality, but only in our minds. Right? In me, not in reality. When you deny, repress, or project something, it doesn't actually go away. You don't really get to disown whatever it is that you find unacceptable in yourself. You simply disclaim the ownership of it. It is still part of our own psychic makeup and tends to make itself known in our lives through all kinds of ways, right? Disturbing dreams, physical or psychological symptoms, interpersonal problems, and so on. And some of us have lots of shadow issues, and some of us have lots of shadow issues. So this is how ego forms. Now it's like, okay, well, here we came into this world, right? We were unity of consciousness to begin with. Some psychologists have called this the oceanic feeling, right? We came into the world and now all of a sudden we're separate in some way, in many ways. And now we go on the spiritual path to find our way back to this unity of consciousness.
But it's putting boundaries, so you never find it in the religious setting.
Do what?
You never find that place in a religious setting because it's full of boundaries.
I wouldn't say never.
Rarely.
Depends on which religious organization you're talking about.
Yes.
I mean, as an interfaith minister, you know, my path is contemplative Christian, if you're familiar with that, which is the mystical side of Christianity. Okay. Sometimes I call myself a Christian Sikh because I'm really in love with Sikhism. But there's weeks that I'm a Buddhist.
Yeah.
Right? There's weeks that I'm a pagan, well, there's months that I'm a pagan. You know,
I ain't praying 5 times a day.
I can be a Sufi, right? Well, that's right, you're not on that devotion path, that's okay, right? Okay, so let's see. I'm meeting a challenge here, but we'll figure it out. Okay. So now, just a little bit about states of consciousness. We have basically 3 main states of consciousness: waking, like you are now; dreaming, right? And you can actually be kind of in between, like daydreaming, if you're really tired when you're awake. And then the third one would be something that we call deep sleep or formless state. Okay. And this is really like a peak experience spiritually, right? You don't feel body or mind, you just feel one. There's other states of consciousness like meditative, yoga, contemplative. There's altered states. Some of you may have tried these with us. Right, Nick? You mentioned mushrooms this morning, didn't you? There's religious experiences. There's a variety of peak experiences. Some of you are really, really lucky. These can happen during lovemaking. So, don't run out of that. It can happen walking through nature. It can happen with music. It can happen with dance. It can happen with sport activities. There's lots of ways that you can alter states of consciousness. So now there's lines of development. So not only do we develop spiritually, we develop cognitively, we develop morally, emotionally, interpersonally, psychosocially, needs and values. You know, we're pretty complex as human beings. We have all these areas that we have to develop. Now, it's hard to develop spiritually if you're not developing all the other areas, because spiritually is bringing back the total thing, right? It's totality. But those are lines of development. And you may develop, for example, develop really highly emotionally and not intellectually. Right? We see that. So you may have to work on one line more than you do the other, if that's what you want to work on. Some people don't want to be too smart, and that's okay. Me, that was my line. I was like, intellect, there I go. And then I realized I was on the razor's edge. I was like, this hurts. I got to find me some other paths. Yes. So we can tear you apart. Okay. So let's see. Stages of development. We've all heard. It's amazing how many theories there are on stages of development for each of these different lines. And they always seem to break it down into 3. Right? You got id, ego, and superego. Remember those? Right? Pretty basic psychology. I hope you know that. Body, mind, spirit. There's 3. Okay. Mythical, rational, mystical. egocentric, ethnocentric, and then world-centric or cosmocentric, right? Where we grow up where we're concerned about ourselves, and we grow up and we're concerned about the small community, our tribe, right? And then we grow up and we say, oh, wait, there's a bigger world that we contribute to. Okay. Now, I mentioned this one before, pre-personal. This is, which goes to personal and transpersonal. And then there's a third one that's called construction, deconstruction. Can you figure out what the third one is?
Reconstruct.
How many of you are familiar with this model? I can't see you raising your hands. So how many of you are familiar with that model? Anybody? Okay. And all of these models pretty much overlap, right? So there's other models that are 6 levels and some that are 7 and some that are 9. What I want to do is really press my time and talk about one 3-level model and one 9-level model. Okay. So let me talk about construction, deconstruction, and reconstruction. I think this is a good area for us to go into based on what Nick talked about. So construction is first about creating forms and boundaries, right? A container. We live in this world, we have to create the me, right? What am I about? In our spiritual and religious life, what are we about? What do we understand? What do we believe? Those are all parts of construction. Those are things that help identify ourselves. It's our first ego construct. It is that pre-personal level. There are some problems with this level, all right? If you stay there, then people can't criticize your system. I think they can back. You want to stay there forever. You want to defend it, right? When we draw boundaries, we want to defend it. And anybody that presses back against us, we do whatever we can to shore up our boundaries, right? So you can apply this to Western Christianity and the Bible Belt, that fundamentalist view, right? It's really always about shoring up boundaries, right? And that's why those people in that group will say, why their religion or their gender or their country or their state or whatever is the best. And it creates intense narcissism. But you have to start there. Matter of fact, it's the best place to start. Which really kind of hurts, right? Especially for when you come out of that, you go, well, wait a minute, why did I have to go through that? Remember, this is part of wholeness as well. You got to go through it. You have to start somewhere where you're very grounded, believing in something passionately about yourself. Okay? And if that's how you understand God, or you understand morals, or you understand family, then that's where you're going to start. Yes, you've got to grow and be able to move beyond that. And, I guess I'll just kind of tap into this for a little bit. Each time we move from one stage to the next, whether it's a 3-stage model or a 9-stage model, or, we probably go through 80,000 of them actually in our lives. These are just models to help us learn from. In between each one is something called a liminal space. Right? L-I-M-I-N-A, liminal space. It's where the old doesn't work anymore, and the new isn't yet clear. So this is really important, especially about what Nick said, and what I'm going to say several more times, is that you have to be able to move into the darkness. You can see this throughout Scripture all the time, right? Go into the desert, right? Deal with uncertainty. Right? Be in the clouds of unknown. And it can feel like dying.
Yes. Yes.
And what we learn from being in this space, if we really enter it, with our true authenticity, is that what we've learned from all the big religions and traditions is that almost all spirituality development is about letting go. So the next stage is deconstruction. And don't get excited about being in this stage. I got a lot to say about this. The deconstruction is where you become educated, right? You have a bigger context, you develop some critical thinking. You've probably even read The Power of Now. Right? How many have read The Power of Now? You understand, somebody say something, sorry. Okay. You understand the context of being a first century Jew. You may have even studied some Hebrew or Greek. You understand interpretation and exegesis. You have a critical mind. Maybe you're on a progressive path where you've been reading the gospel from a progressive point of view. You have a social justice concern. And what happens with this group? It just creates more people that think they're right. This creates more people that think they're right. And pretty angry people, too. It doesn't matter if you're angry on the left or the right, angry as a conservative or a liberal thinker. You're just an angry person. And judgment persists. And what do you have? Lo and behold, intense narcissism. See, the liberal way of thinking is always trapped and always picking things apart. They have a theology of suspicion. Right? Or in the constructive, the constructive area, or the conservative thinking is, guarding. Don't mess with my system. Right? Shore up their boundaries. Right? And neither one grows. You think about today, one of the things we look at in society is we have these post-denominational kids that are growing up really into this deconstruction area, right? Where they don't have that construction, that basic founding and grounding. And they're never passionate about anything. And they can be the ones that will pick things apart more and more, right? Because as soon as you say something, they have this over-activated critical mind, and they'll say, but this, but that, well this, well that. Right? And they can never move beyond that. It's a real trap we face, especially in interspiritual ministry, because we're dealing with a lot of what we call the spiritual but not religious, which happens to be a lot of millennials who seem to have grown up without this construction block in their development. There's lots of reasons that do that. And we see this within the literature that some of you have probably read. Like if you read John Shelby's Spawn or Boltman, right? You go, wow, that's really great. What you find out, he's just really angry about what he's writing about. It's a good stepping stone, right? I read Spawn, it was a big stepping stone for me. But they're really negative against the tradition.
Yes.
Right? But there's a lot to be gained from learning about the traditions. There's a lot of things that we don't know, especially that we've lost over like the last 500 years in Christianity. I'll reel myself back in. But there's what happens in this area of deconstruction, and I'm really sorry about time. What happens in this area of deconstruction is that people think that they're enlightened. They've got there, right? And what happens is the person that's in this deconstruction area or this personal area sees this transpersonal area that we're really trying to grow into is not personal, just as pre-personal is not personal. So this is called the pre-trans fallacy. So they think that they're there already. Right? And this transpersonal area can look exactly like this area from this perspective. Okay? This is what Wilbur calls the pre-trans fallacy. In both of these areas, construction and deconstruction avoid reconstruction, which is where real faith begins. Both construction and deconstruction are dualistic. Both are oppositional thinking that lead to a false sense of superiority. Where in one area we say don't label, and in the other area we say don't dismiss. And we do it too quickly. We have to be able to break down our glib assertions about what it is we know. And that too feels like dying. And it isn't until we suffer a major humiliation that we can move beyond it. It isn't until you suffer that you're going to move beyond it. You can think about some of the symbolism in Scripture. You can see Moses on Mount Sinai and Jesus on Mount Tabor. And first you have the apparition, and it's covered in clouds, then the epiphany, and then the revelation. And that symbolism in the clouds is that period of darkness, that unknown. Right? Matter of fact, there's a great book out there, The Cloud of Unknown. But faith is always knowing that there's a balance between knowing and not knowing. You can have people that are in this deconstruction area that will say, I don't believe the virgin birth, right, for whatever reason. Or you can have the other one shoring it up. Hey, I read it, I saw it in black and white, that's what it is. But in this reconstruction area, it's not interested in that. It's really interested in what beautiful symbol is communicated and just exploring.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? That's what spirituality is about meaning, not about answers. And that's what mystical traditions are about, is about experiencing God. It's not about knowing about God. Right? We could probably write some great books and great descriptions about honey, right? With a color and a texture and how it flows and how sticky it is and how good it tastes and what it feels like to run across your tongue. And you just hold it in your mouth. But those descriptions don't do anything. It isn't until you pick up the honey and you experience it for yourself that you know something for yourself. And that's what our spiritual development is about. It's about getting into a place where we experience this thing we call God, this mystery that we call God. It isn't about knowing. Knowing's a path, right? I told you that at the beginning. Sure, it's a path. It leads you, it'll provide you information. You go, okay, you're going to have a couple of aha moments, and you're going to go, I really want to experience this. And you're going to find out that you're going to have ways to do that.
I find that I just ask people to show me,
That's right.
and that usually ends the conversation once you're there.
You know that, think about this, you can ask yourself questions about how I experience God, instead of what do I know about God. And if you experience God as the source of life, then the only way you can worship is by living fully. If you experience God as the source of love, the only way you can worship Him is by loving extravagantly.
Wow.
And if you experience God as the ground of all being, then the only way you can worship is by being all you can be. The more deeply and fully I can be who I am, the more I make God visible. And not just to me. And the more and deeply fully that you can be all you can be, you'll make God visible share a quote with you, and then I'm going to move on to the nine-stage section. This comes from Rabbi Kotzer, Kotzker, from about the year 1787. He says, "If I am I, because I am I, and you are you, because you are you, then I am I, and you are you. But if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not I, and you are not you. We enter on." Try to memorize that. If I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you, then I am I and you are you. That's it. Good. All right. That's it. But if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am who I am, then I am not I and you are not you. And how can you come to know yourself until you've known another?
We are. All is one. Now it's all there is.
Okay, so now I'm going to break this down instead of into 3 areas, I'm going to break it down into 9. And like I said, it overlaps, so you're going to hear some of the same things, just kind of said in different ways or the same way. Levels of growth, okay, or we call these stages, yeah.
This construction model, which you just spoke about,
Yes.
what, like school of psychology does that come from?
That one's actually more from a spiritual side, like interval theory. Understand? It's really taken, what it's really done is it's taken kind of a 9-level model and crunched it down into 3 blocks. So you can see that like the construction will have 3 levels, 3 sub-levels in deconstruction, and reconstruction will have 3. You can probably find this in books like Richard Rohr, Cynthia Bourgeot.
Yes, yes.
Who else? There's probably a couple others. Like I said, it's the same. They just kind of put different labels on it, from their perspective.
So it's not like Maslow or somebody?
No,
Okay.
I would assign it to Ken Wilber before me. Who's one of those, anyway, I mean, he glows when he walks into a talk. In my opinion. I don't know what you'll say. Some bald guy in a t-shirt. So the levels of growth. So many of our problems can be resolved if we understand that people are at different levels and different stages of growth. The importance of levels of development has become recognized by teachers like Teresa of Avila, Jonathan Cross, Jonathan Jay, Lawrence Kohlberg, Abraham Maslow, James Comer, Claire Graves, Ken Wilber, Bill Platt. So all kinds of speaks out there about that. Some speak of 6 levels, some 8, and some 10. But in general, they move in a very similar direction. There's a very common description for our human maturation. Thomas Aquinas said, whatever is received according to the manner of the receiver. As a minister and a teacher, I've found that whatever I teach will be heard on many different levels, according to your inner psychological and spiritual maturity. It is rather obvious once you say it. Right? So that's why I say it. And Jesus was teaching the same thing in his parable of the 4 different kinds of soil, right? Matthew 13:4-9. So I'm going to describe a 9-stage level. Note that this is merely a teaching tool. In real life, the spiritual journey is much more subtle and complex. We progress through these stages not usually in linear or completely chronological. Also, there's an inherent danger in teaching about these levels, as the ego will try to use this information to place it in a higher level than it is. So I invite you to a deep openness, a humble honesty, and a desire for your wholeness that only God can give you. There's a remarkable overlap and agreement among the various schemata of development, and we find psychology and spirituality beautifully coming together here. Does anybody know what the Greek word for soul is?
Suke.
Which is in English?
Psychology, the root.
Very good. What they're all trying to say is that growth is going somewhere in a trajectory toward union. Union with God, with the self, of mind, body, and heart. Go back to the Bible, soul, strength, all right? With others, union with others, and with the cosmos. All of those models seem to agree that the lower, our beginning levels, are dualistic, while the higher, perhaps I should say deeper levels, are non-dual or unitive, or discernment. The early stages are egocentric and the later ones are cosmocentric. So we can kind of put that up here beside these again. So this would be ego, cosmo. On a good day, the most you can stretch yourself to understand is toward people one step beyond yourself. Okay? It shows how narcissistic we all really are. People at the higher levels look ridiculous, wrong, heretical, or even dangerous to people in the lower levels. Right? Now you can see why the Jewish prophets, Jesus, and Martin Luther Jr. King were killed. Martin Luther King Jr. On the other hand, people at the higher, those non-dual levels, have the breadth and depth to understand, to accept, and to forgive all the earlier or lower levels. Their honesty allows them to see that they were once there themselves. And I will emphasize, as Ken Wilber does, that we don't move from one level to the next and leave the other completely. We always transcend and include. Okay? Write that down if you're a note taker. Transcend and include. It doesn't oppress the lower level, it embraces it. It's not about development, it's about envelopment. Okay? And this path, whether it's through 3 levels or 9 levels or the 80,000 we're going to experience, isn't linear. Okay? That's why Wilbur calls it spiral dynamics. We're going to come into these levels and we're going to go back into those levels. We're going to come into those levels and we're going to come back out and go into the lower levels. And we're going to die 1,000 deaths.
Yay.
Yay! Spirituality.
Only really wormhole.
The way you move from one stage to stage is basically by some form of wounding, failure, or darkness. John of the Cross calls these experiences nights. Not K-N-I-G-H-T, like dark, N-I-G-H-T. The old system that worked for you a while has stopped working, and it will. All seem to agree that you have to go through a period of unknowing. Sounds like faith to me. Right? The very word faith implies the meaning you don't know. Right? You're going to go through this period of unknowing to know at a higher level and a more mature level. You have to go through a period of confusion and shadow boxing, dealing with your own conflicts and your own contradictions. So quit worrying about other people, because I'm telling you, you got plenty of work to do. I'm saying this from my own experience.
Yes.
Okay? And to be honest, we have little good teaching on how to walk in darkness. I'll mention that.
Right.
Which is the very essence of biblical faith. If you do not have someone to guide you, to teach you, to hold on to you during those times of not knowing, not feeling, not understanding, You will normally stay at your present level of growth. This is why community is so important. This is the work of a good spiritual director, me, or teacher, me, or even an effective homily, which can be given by anyone. Now you perhaps see why Jesus praised faith even more than love. Love is the goal, but faith is the laborer's journey toward that goal. So this stage one, I'm going to call this my body and my self-image are who I am. Body and self-image. At this first stage, a person tends to be totally identified with their body, their image of their body. I am my body is what infants believe. They are not yet connected in any enlightened way to their heart or their mind. Each part, body, heart, and mind, is dangerous if it's largely disconnected from the other two. Integration is opening up all three spaces so that they can enlighten and inform and balance each other. Those three spaces, body, heart, mind. Think of little children. They poop and pee and cuddle and eat without shame or defense. Isn't it funny how when we mention a body function, there's always laughter? They are their bodies, and in a way that makes them so dear because they haven't made it complex yet by thinking too much. They run into the room naked with no embarrassment whatsoever. Ginger, knock it off. We teach them shame by our shocked reactions. At the first stage, my body, its image, and the pleasuring and protecting of it is largely who I am. Many people in secular non-wisdom culture like ours may never move past stage one. People at this level tend to be preoccupied with pleasure, security, safety, and defense of their material state. If it makes me feel secure, it's more. Life becomes largely about protecting myself. And this is seen in the endless need for war and guns, little need for education, culture, the arts, and spirituality. Stage one people are very dualistic, either-or thinkers, and frankly, they represent a rather sizable minority of humans. Their morality largely has to do with maintaining their group, and their group as superior. And I believe that God and grace nudge most people at least to the next stage. But first they have to allow some of the security and pleasure aspects to be taken away.
You ever been called racist for saying what you just said?
And other things too. Stage two, my external behavior is who I am. My behavior is who I am. Most of human history up to now has been at stage two, and frankly, a lot of Jesus' teaching is aimed at this level because it's all about purity codes, debt codes, dogmas, and external rituals, because that was the stage where most of his listeners were. At stage two, your concern is to look good on the outside. You're concerned with pleasing the neighborhood, the village, your religion, or your kind of folks, because such a way of life will get you very practiced at hiding or disguising any evidence to the contrary. And that's why it's so dangerous. This becomes the birth of the shadow self, and eventually your shadow side, your denied motives, from your real self, is actually hidden from you. You have to start pretending that you are what looks good to your group and your religion. Your whole identity becomes defending your external behavior as more moral than other people, and defending your family, your community, your race, your church, your temple, your mosque, your nation, and calling them all superior to anything else. This is tribal thinking. It is a necessary stage, however, so that you can feel like you were chosen, or significant, or have dignity. It gives you a strong sense of your identity and boundaries, which serves you well as a child, but many people remain trapped here in a worldview of win-lose, good guys, bad guys. far right-wing thinkers, the false conservative, in any country or in any religion, largely proceeds from stage 1 or 2. Right? Eventually, your own behavior group is going to have to disappoint you. You will begin to see that yourself or some people in your group are in fact unkind, dishonest, or violent, and you'll want to move out of it. That is the beginning of integrating the negative as a necessary shadow box. If you are incapable of such appropriate critical thinking, you'll go through the darkness, the necessary deeper faith journey that will move you on to stage 3. Stage 3 is my thoughts and feelings on who I am. Thoughts and feelings on who I am. Thank God many people are nudged by life itself and by common sense and honesty to the bare beginnings of critical thinking. I'll emphasize the bare beginnings of critical thinking. Thank you, Nick. People at stage 3 believe my own thoughts and my own feelings are who I am. But I do not yet see that most of my thoughts are self-referential and to my advantage and preference, and my emotions are usually all about me. Right. Did you know that the word empathy didn't even enter into the English dictionary until 1950? At this stage, you'll probably say things like, I've read a few books, I can quote some authors, I've become more educated, I've read Eckhart Tolle, but it is not really the big picture yet. I'm still trapped at an egocentric level without knowing it. At this point, education is usually a substitute for actual transformation. I mentioned that before. So, beware of those college students who are invariably at this stage 3 and think that they're at stage 6 or 7. Right? If stage 2 is more common among conservatives, then stage 3 is more common among liberals. Stage 2 creates groups, stage 3 creates individuals, and this is very hard for stage 3 people to really work together for long. Right? These individuals cannot die to themselves enough to actually seek the common good. Right? See those people? Right? Image focused, right? Like their possessions and their prestige and their power. Most of educated America and Europe is still at stage 3. They are good people, they're easy to make friends with, they're dialogical and conversational, but do not ask them to go very far beyond their own comfort zone. So between stage 3 and stage 4, if a death is required between every stage, a period of darkness and not knowing, then surely an even larger letting go is necessary to move from stage 3 to stage 4. This is probably why Western cultures are at stage 3. Without great love, and I mean great love of somebody other than yourself, or great suffering, where there is a major defeat, a major humiliation, a major shock to the ego, very few people move to stage 4. So get ready. It's going to hurt. And you could probably hear God saying it's going to hurt you more than that. This is the great dying of all the spiritual teachers are talking about. And as Jesus puts it in John 12, unless the grain of wheat dies, it remains just a grain of wheat. But if it dies, it will bear much fruit. Historically, classical initiation rites were programmed to move people at least an initial experience of stage 4. If you can get people to stage 4, normal growth will continue to happen from there. Because now you know that dying to self is central and necessary.
So stage 4 is dying to self?
No, I haven't got, this is what it takes to get to stage 4.
Yes.
Okay. To get from one stage to the next is always about dying, right?
Yes.
Right? And then the next stage is resurrection, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's this cycle. Right? We're going to die to an old way of being, and we're going to rise into a new way of being.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go through the darkness. And then there's going to be a birth. Right? Sounds familiar? And there's no blood in this story. But this is where you're going to learn the art of letting go. If you really can get from stage 3 to stage 4, you're really going to understand this art of letting go. You have learned that you don't need to be certain every step of the way. The meaning of faith is slowly becoming clear to you, walking in darkness and trust. A certain tolerance for ambiguity and paradox is learned in this movement from stage 3 to stage 4. And if you really think you're at stage 4, you're probably not. Right? But to be honest, many backslide from stage 4 when they see the high price. Many will go back and want that comfort zone. Some will stay in stage 2. So stage 4, my deeper intuitions and felt knowledge in my body are who I am. Deeper intuitions and felt knowledge. If you can stay in that liminal space between 3 and 4, if you can suffer the shock and humiliation and the necessary failure of your game falling apart without regressing to the earlier, more dualistic thinking, you'll ideally move to this stage 4. People who have been trained to keep their heart and head spaces open and to live grounded inside their own bodies and feel their real feelings are able to pass to stage 4 because they have the greatest capacity for presence and presence to what actually is, right, to reality. For some, this is such a breakthrough, so enriching, so grounding and self-validating after a wallowing around in ego and confusion for so many years that it feels like enlightenment itself. Remember I talked about the pre-trans fallacy, where you think you're there and not there yet. They have depth compared to everybody else, right? To all those hopeless around them, the lost. They can lead, but this can lead to individualism, self-absorption, and inner work as a substitute for any honest encounter with others or with the other. In such a place, there's a real social conscious beyond verbal political correctness, and usually a lack of compassion or active concern for what is happening on earth. Which tells you, since you're not cosmocentric, you're not there yet. But if you are authentically present in stage 4, you'll begin to see your shadow self in sometimes really humiliating ways. When without humility, you will run back to stage 3, and many do. You'll see your phony motivation, that you are not as holy as you thought you were, that you are largely doing this for your own self-image, to think of yourself as moral, aware, or enlightened. And I would draw a parallel between what Nick was saying about the enlightened fundamentalist, right? Politeness and political correctness will pass for actual love. Yet this struggle and humiliation is what is going to lead you to real non-dual thinking. When you face the enemy, and the enemy is you, and you recognize that you can't project evil onto other religions, races, classes, political parties, or genders, you realize I'm the problem, I'm petty, needy, self-absorbed, or whatever it might be. Then you'll recognize you're in stage 4. You will have picked up your cross. Stage 5, my shadow self is who I am. At stage 5, my shadow self is who I am. And this is not an easy time, and thus most avoid it. Okay? This is what John of the Cross called the night of senses. Here you have met yourself in the raw, unvarnished, uncivilized state, and you start dealing with very realistically with your own shadow self, your own phoniness, your mixed motives, and your actual unlovingness. For example, think of this, celibacy can be based on the utter false premise that if I do not love anybody in particular, I would automatically love God more. You see that? It's easy then to love yourself more, but in a very well-disguised form. Much of the middle period of life is spent shadowboxing, seeing our own inability to believe and to practice the very things we teach to others, including me. And this continues and continues and continues. The work of stage 5 can go on for quite a lifetime. And if you don't have someone loving you during that period, believing in you, holding on to you, if you do not meet the unconditional love of God, if you do not encounter the radical sense of grace that touches your unconscious level, the spiritual journey will not continue. And this is one of the reasons in my ministry I emphasize experience. To open yourselves up to the presence and action of God in your life. And Sunday I may speak a little bit about spiritual practices and how you can do that. On the coin flip on what I'm going to talk about Sunday. You have to experience God's grace as unearned favor, unearned gratuity, or you'll surely regress. At stage 5, more than any other stage, you learn to live with contradiction and ambiguity. This is where true non-dual unitive thinking begins. Stage 5 always allows you to find God in that luminous darkness. Remember I talked about finding God in the darkness and the bad things as well when we talked about wholeness. It's a real darkness, but somehow inside of the darkness you find light. A much truer, kinder, and softer light. And mostly, you learn patience. Stage 6, I'm empty and powerless. And the very words here can be one that's just even hard to get past. Alcoholics Anonymous would call stage 6 the first step. Can you imagine to be in an AA program or Celebrate Recovery program or whatever? You've got 5 stages to go through before you can even do step 1. Right? Almost any attempt to save yourself by any superior behavior, technique, belonging system, morality, role, strong ideological belief, or religious devotion won't work. It will actually lead to regression. What the saints and mystics say is that some event, struggle, or relationship or suffering in your life has to lead you to the edge of your own resources. There has to be something that you by yourself cannot fix, control, change, or even begin to deal with. It is that raw experience of I cannot do this. All you can do at this point is wait and ask and trust. This is where you learn real patience, compassion, and forgiveness. I don't know how else you learn to forgive other people until you see 70 times 7 your own brokenness, your own incapacity to love, and in this stage your inability to do anything about it except throw yourself inside the arms of mercy and love. And you can see Luke 7:47. This is the darkness of faith. And now you can trust that this darkness is a much better teacher than supposed certainty or rightness.
Yes.
God is about to become very real for you. Whether you call it the all or reality or unity conscious, it doesn't really matter. It's going to become very real for you. Some will even call this God's waiting room. It will be done unto you. And this is the real meaning of biblical faith. Darkness is a much better teacher than light. I have to emphasize at this point that unless you transform your pain, you're going to transmit it. 100%. Until you transform your pain, until you learn that lesson, till you understand the deep meaning of that experience, will you be transformed. And until you're transformed, you're going to transmit it. You're going to project it onto other people. You're going to act out in other ways. You might be a progressive, you might be an aggressive behavior. 100%. If you do not transform your pain, you're going to transmit it. This stage 6 is time is better than efficiency or any performance principle. And at this point, God is becoming very real. You are being led to the edge of your own resources. You can't fix it. You can't control it. You can't even explain it. You fall into the hands of the living God. God stops being a doctrine or a dogma or a belief system and becomes an inner upholder, an inner lover, an inner partner. God is no longer a theory. And if level 2 is where external behavior is sin, which is scandalous, then level 6 is where Jesus says you can come into a new stage or a new level. Stage 7, I'm much more than who I thought I was. Your life is not about you. You are part of something much bigger. When you finally accept your own powerlessness, you will learn to plug into a very different outlet and draw upon a much deeper source. This is conversion. This is transformation. This is radical transformation. It is like an identity transplant. And St. Paul describes his own conversion in this way, right? In Galatians 2. I live no longer not I, but I live in Christ and Christ lives in me. You will experience a much larger sense of self, and it is not all about you anymore. At stage 7, you have a qualitatively different sense of yourself. You might even feel, I am much more than I thought I was. The false self has died in a significant way, and the true self is starting to take over. And that is the false self. Separation. But because you are not fully at home here, you will first of all feel like a void, an emptiness, but hopefully an okay emptiness. If you learn patience, you're going to be able to stay there. You'll be able to sit there for a bit. And you'll begin to act for the sake of the action itself, because it is true, because it's good, because it's beautiful, and not because it's popular, and not even because it works. There is no felt consolation most of the time, and there is a lessening social reward. Yet there is great peace. You are being weaned off your reliance upon your feeling world, right? Which means very little at this point. Because you are living in the larger self, everything becomes okay. You know another is holding you. You don't need to hold yourself. You are at the heart of faith. And in a certain sense, true spirituality only begins at this point. Most of Jesus' teachings proceed from this point or higher, which is why much of the church has not been ready for Jesus. And when you get here, it's kind of a little hint. You'll begin to read the Gospel according to John in a totally different way. Totally different way. Which brings me to stage 8, which is I and the Father are one. John 10:30. Eventually you are led by grace into the non-dual state. Not totally one, but not two either. Remember, non-dualistic thinking isn't the excluding dualistic thinking. I did not know anyone that is in stage 8 the full 24 hours a day. Not even Ken Wilber. This is unitive consciousness. This is where you live in conscious, loving communion and trust with God and everyone else. God is no longer out there or separate from you. He's not Santa Claus. He's not the white guy in the clouds. Right? And henceforth, as Teresa of Avila says, you find God in yourself and you find yourself in God.
Amen.
This is largely an inner experience. I will emphasize experience. It's an inner knowing. It's not an intellectual knowing. It is truly following Christ, who is a mixture of humanity and divinity. Go figure. You know that you are the body of Christ and that your source is divine, while you are still quite ordinary and human. What else could it be? You came forth from God, your deepest DNA is divine, and you're on your way home.
Yes.
And to the title of our conference, Awakening to Divine Love. Every other aspect of your persona, your roles, your titles, your functions, and even your bodily self is seen as a passing form and a passing ego expression or possession. At this point, you know your body is not fully you. You've found your soul. You've found your true self. And you are hidden with Christ in God. Colossians 3:3. And I'm going to have to draw it smaller just because of space. And you're drawn here, inside and outside, because you can't be there all the time. We live in a dualistic world. You are who you were. Oh, let's see. Frankly, you have discovered your soul, which is that part of you that already knows, already loves, is already in union with, and quite naturally says yes to God. You're on your way back to that oceanic feeling that you came out of your mother's womb with.
Yes.
Interesting note, the word compassion comes from the same word that one does, the birthing out of love into love. When you learn how to trust this divine indwelling, and that's what it is, it's God in you doing the God thing through you. And when you learn how to draw from that place, you find your happiness any hour of the day, anywhere.
Yes.
Right? You can pray always. Because praying then becomes not about saying words, but seeing life through the eyes of God. And some of these metaphors just beautiful. And isn't it amazing how quickly some of us want to get rid of them? Right? You also realize this is what you were created for. Heaven is not later. Heaven and salvation are whenever you live in conscious union with God.
Amen.
Even the Pope said that. You live in a profound sense of unity of conscious and universal connectedness. What a pain would you suffer for that? What would you let go of for that? Would you begin to listen to that still small voice?
Yes.
Stage 9, I am who I am. Stage 9 is what we mean by the freedom of the children of God. You can see this in Romans 8:21, Galatians 5:1. It's stage 9, I am who I am. I have nothing to prove or project to make you think I'm anything more than who I am. Stage 9 is the most radical critique of religion possible. It sees religion as the fingers that merely point to the moon. And now I'm sitting on the moon. So thank you, fingers. It was great being Catholic or Protestant or Jewish or Sikh or whatever for so many years, but I really don't need to prove that any of those is the only way to God, because I know better now. And it didn't matter if you prayed 5 times a day. It didn't matter if you studied Scripture for 18 hours a day. It didn't matter if you meditated for 8 hours a day. Whatever the heck it was, you're there. You come to a point where you don't need to deplete the resources of the earth and the world to militarily protect the United States, because it's only one small part of God's kingdom. There's no need at stage 9 to appear to be anything other than who you really are. At stage 9, you are fully non-dual, fully detached from self-image, and are living in God's full image of you, right? Image of God, which includes and loves both the good and the bad.
Yes.
Matthew 22:10. This is total non-duality. You are living in God's gaze. I am who I am in God's eyes. Nothing else, nothing more, nothing less. This is the serenity and freedom of the saints. This is the goal. Yet there is no non-stop flight to this goal. You must in some way traverse all 8 stages to get there in a horrific spiral dynamic. And you can't skip any of them. Not even the first one, whether it's 3-stage or 9-stage. But don't try to engineer this journey. You can't do it. You're being led. And God will make sure you get what you need and when you need it. That's why you're here. Right? And you only fully know that for yourself at this stage. You have to come through it with trust. And maybe this is what Jesus meant when he said that those who become like little children will enter the kingdom. Or actually create the kingdom. At this final stage, you return to that early little child that you once were, running naked into the room of life, Ginger. I am who I am. God has accepted me as the naked being, and I can happily give myself back to God exactly as I am.
Amen.
I am ready for death because I have done it many times.
Amen.
And it's only led me into a larger world.
Yes.
I told you, Nick. So that's the end of my presentation. The invitation for this conference is still to let go, to listen, to love.
Yes.
And I'd just like to take one more minute and share a story with you as we go. Do you have anything else before I close?
I'll just mention before you close us out that we will gather back here tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Let's just come and fellowship, and then we'll start the program right at 10. And I just wanted to mention myself that, as we all think about what is a conference is about a coming together and a sharing. And I just think it's really timely as we look around globally and the universe about unity consciousness and loving each one of us where we are in whatever cycle we're in. And I'm excited for the rest of the weekend as we learn more about cycles and time and no time and just experience what we're going to experience this weekend. So that's what I wanted to say.
So I just wanted to share this story. I love sharing this story. I share it every chance I get, even when it's not relevant to the topic that I'm talking about. That's how much I love this story. And this is a story about a person I know. This person has this amazing heart. He's kind, generous, caring. This person is someone I really deeply believe in. In their lifetime, I know that this person is going to accomplish something amazingly significant, great significance. They are a person with unlimited potential and infinite worth, so precious and so unique and so special that they can't be compared to anybody else. And this person is loved beyond measure. This person is you. And I'm on the edge of my seat waiting to see what awesomeness will come from you. Believe in yourself. Reaffirm your potential. Declare your heart through action. And know that you are believed in, held, and loved. May peace fill your life so that love will overflow. Thank you.